Well, good morning. My name is Jesse Lorenz, and I'm a technical evangelist with Salesforce.com. And today we're going to be talking about creating rich user experiences with Adobe Flex and Google Visualizations, as well as Google Maps. And I'm going to be joined today by my colleague, Nick Simha, who is a Partner Enablement Manager with Salesforce.com. So before we get started, I do have to show you the Safe Harbor statement. If you'd like to learn more about it, it is available on our website. So today, the theme of this session is really going to be inspiration. So the reason why we're talking about this is not because the Force.com UI is bad. In fact, the Force.com UI and our Salesforce CRM applications have won numerous awards for the quality of their user interfaces, and we have a tremendously high user adoption. So, you know, they're great apps, and I know that most of you here have probably played around with them and maybe even customized the page layouts to make them work better for you. So the reason why we're talking about using these additional technologies today is that sometimes the Force.com user interface or the Salesforce CRM interface doesn't quite work the way you or your users want to work. And we recognize that that's sometimes a problem, and we want to make sure that when that happens, that you have as many options as possible to make the user interface work for your users. So 2 years ago, we introduced Visual Force for this express purpose. We wanted to make sure that you could create things like wizards and other great stuff native on Force.com. More recently, we've partnered with Google and Adobe to bring their technology to our platform so that you can use it to create the user experiences that your users want. And one thing I want to point out, too, is that while we're only going to be talking about Adobe and Google technologies today, you really have a lot of options. So we are agnostic in this experience. There's even Google technologies that we're not going to have a chance to talk about today that you might use. There's a Google Web Toolkit. In addition, there's a huge assortment of really great JavaScript libraries that you might use, like jQuery or YUI. You might even want to use Microsoft Silverlight with your Force.com or Salesforce CRM apps. And if you do, that's great. We want to make sure that you have the options to use your skill sets and to solve the problems that you have with whatever feels best. So we have no bias here. Unfortunately, we have a limited amount of time, so we're only going to be talking about Adobe Flex and Google technologies today. So here's our agenda. So Nick and I spent a lot of time thinking about how to best present this information to you. We really wanted to make sure that you felt like we had shown you what you can do with Force.com to really make a great user interface. And so the example that we're going to be using today is a recruiting application. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you that recruiting application, and then we're going to show you some additions that we've made to it using Adobe Flex and these Google technologies to help you understand the options that you have available to you. So again, really, the session's about inspiration. And one thing that I want to point out is that there's a supporting web page for this session. And there's a couple ways to get to it. You can start at Developer Force, and you can drill down through the Dreamforce links and actually get to this session. And another option is to go to this URL that I'm showing you here, bit.ly/richUIs. And one thing to point out is capitalization is important here, and that S at the end is also important. But if you want to go there right now and check out the information that we've got there, you can certainly do that. We're actually including all the source code from today's session, so you can download it, take a look at it, and understand what we're talking about in a little bit more depth. In addition, we'll also be around for part of the afternoon so that you can talk to us one-on-one as well. So I mentioned that we're going to be using a recruiting application to talk about improving the user experience and the different use cases that go along with that. And the recruiting app that we're using is actually straight from the Force.com developer guide. So this is a book that you might be familiar with. It's also available as a PDF on our website. And there are instructions for getting this installed into your org. And we're going to be customizing it today. So hopefully some of you are maybe familiar with this. If not, there's some great resources. This is another great way to learn how to start building apps on top of Force.com. So let's talk about that recruiting app. And let's actually show you a demo of what it looks like to make this a little bit more concrete. So here I am. I'm in a developer edition org. And if you're familiar with Force.com already, you know about custom objects. And so let me show you what that looks like. So here's our data model inside of Force.com. We've got a location custom object. So maybe this is your company, right? And you've got 4 locations around the world. Your headquarters is in San Francisco, very similar to Salesforce, and Toronto, Virginia, New York, etc. And at each one of those locations, you've got positions that you're actually interviewing for and are open. You want to hire someone. And you can see that this object stores really important information like which department this position is in, who the hiring manager is, and a short job description. And of course, as you might expect, there's also a candidate custom object. And we can drill into the candidate custom object and see that we're storing pretty basic recruiting information, first name, last name, address, other stuff like that. And then if we move further down the page, there's also job applications. So this candidate has applied to a position. And so this is that junction object that marries the candidate to the position so that candidates can apply to multiple positions. It has some status information that might be useful too. And for really great job applications, there are, of course, interviews as well. So a very important part to that recruiting process. So this is kind of a simple application. It's not really sophisticated. You probably wouldn't deploy this straight away to your company. But I think this is a good way to talk about building better user interfaces. And it also happens to be a great way to learn how to build apps on Force.com. So just to kind of give you one more view of what this recruiting app looks like, this is the entity relationship diagram. So all of those objects that I showed you before are right here. We've got the user, who's a hiring manager, and that's associated with the position. And of course, positions are associated with locations. And then you can also see the other important objects, the candidate, the job application, and the interview. So I'd like to introduce you to Nick Simha, who's our Partner Enablement Manager, and he's going to talk to you about the Flex use case.
Thanks, Jesse, and thank you all for being here. And as Jesse mentioned, as developers, you have a lot of choices of combining different technologies with Visual Force. So we'll start by looking at some of the reasons why you may want to look at Flex, Adobe Flex. Has anybody in the audience already used Flex before? Adobe Flex, Flash? OK, how many have seen something in a Flash player before? Pretty much everybody? Yeah. OK. So one of the things Flex allows you to do is to build what are called these rich Internet applications. And you have seen many of them. I mean, you've seen them play in the Flex Flash player. What they do is they incorporate not only the data from your backend, but also animation and rich media, like video and audio and everything else. I mean, YouTube is pretty much built on the Flash kind of this thing out there. The second thing is it is browser independent, just like Visual Forces. So Flash Player, the adoption of Flash Player is 99.some%, and you can find it out. I mean, when there's the latest statistics. So the adoption is wider than any single individual browser. So what it means is the user experience is very consistent. No matter what platform they're on, no matter what browser they're on, they'll get the same user experience. The other thing, as a developer, you don't have to go through the trouble of testing it for every permutation and combination of OS and browser out there. So the browser independence is a big deal. Finally, the Flex programming model can be used to build not only web applications, but also these offline applications as well. There's a whole class of applications where you may not be connected all the time to the internet, but you still need to use the application. You still need to have access to the data. So those are desktop or offline applications. You can use the same programming language, same model, same tools to build it and deploy those applications. So in summary, it's really the combination of Force.com and Flex gives you the best of both worlds. You can build applications that are not only functionally rich using the Force.com technology, but also visually very compelling. And I would encourage you to stop by the Adobe booth. I think they'll be here till noon. And they got some really cool demos, not just with Force.com, but just, it will open up, you'll start thinking about the range of things you can do on the visual side to make, to really make your applications come alive. So let's look at the development process of how Flex works. Now, Flex is it's kind of this umbrella term that Adobe uses. There are a lot of really bits and pieces to this thing, to this Flex terminology. But at the core is a programming model and a programming language. The programming language is called ActionScript. It is an object-oriented language, much like Apex is or Java is. They also provide a declarative language called MXML. And you see snippets of both. You see MXML snippet on the top there, and actually the ActionScript within the script tags out there. So usually programmers use both to build their applications. MXML also gets compiled into ActionScript classes. So once you write your application, write your program, you pass it through the Flex compiler, and the output is called a Swift file. There's a binary file that's called a Swift file. And then you upload it to a web server. It could be any web server, and when you're doing development with Force.com, you will upload it to your Force.com org out there as a static resource. Now, and it is referenced in a HTML or a Visual Force page. Now, when a user requests that page, the page is downloaded and rendered inside of the Flash player. So I think I might have not mentioned this explicitly, but Flex programs run inside of a Flash player. That's what makes them browser independent. And Flash players are available on every platform and every operating system out there. So your application is being executed inside the Flash player, and then it can make call-outs back to the web server to request data there. And it can use a variety of protocols like SOAP, HTTP, and other Adobe protocols out there. And when it wants to talk to Force.com or your data on your Force.com org, it will use the toolkit to do so. And what the toolkit is, it's really a way to access the web services API that we provide. How many here have used the web services API in some form? Okay, so quite a few. And then, as you know, the data loader also uses the web services API. We've had the web services API for a long time. We are currently, this is the version 17 of the API. And essentially, it gives you a way to access the data. It's like, you can think about like the query operation, the update, the delete, and other things through a SOAP, through the SOAP protocol, through Web Services API. And the Force.com toolkit for Flex, it gives you a way to access those APIs or those operations through ActionScript. So since as a Flex programmer, you'll be using ActionScript to write your programs, this gives you an easy way to access the data that you have in your Salesforce org. So let's say in the application she just showed you, you want to access all the candidates who have applied for a certain position. So I would, in my program, I would start by creating a connection class, which is my main handle to all my web services operation, call the query method on that, and I'll get back a result set, which in ActionScript will be an array collection, and each row in my database will show up as an element in the array collection, and it will be of type called SObject. We're going to look at code. I'm going to show you the code later, but the point I wanted to make out here is the pattern that you see out here is pretty generic, and the amount of code that you have to write to interact with Force.com is not a lot of code. So most of the time you'll be spending on when you're doing a Flex UI would be to build your design and make your UI compelling, which is what you really want, because you don't want to. So the toolkit really makes the job of getting data, putting the data back into Force.com as easy as possible. And I also want to mention this toolkit itself is available on our developer website. It's also open sourced. So if you're already a Salesforce customer or a Force.com customer, there's no charge to use it or use it or modify that as well if you need to make any enhancement. So with that, I'm going to switch over to my laptop to show you the demo. I hope I don't mess anything up here, but okay. Okay. Getting the hardware to work is sometimes harder than building. Okay. I think that should stay. Oops. How did you do this, Jesse? Yeah, okay. There we go. So as Jesse mentioned, we went through an existing application because we wanted to, the idea was not to, like you may not want to build everything in Flex or Google, use Google Maps everywhere and all those things, but to take an existing application and introduce these new technologies where it makes sense. So one of the things we thought about is the role of a recruiter. I mean, if you think about it, a recruiter is the kind of the heavy-duty user of this application. How can we make the user experience a little bit better? So one of the challenges you have when you have a lot of candidates coming in, different interview times and so forth, is really keeping all the data straight, like not misplacing resumes, not misplacing the times of interviews. So we built this Flex component to handle that. And I'm going to switch over. I need to move this a little bit here. Oops. So that I can use the mouse. Yeah, in just a minute. I'll just try to. Okay, we'll just work with that. So this is the component that you see out here. It's called a Flex accordion component. So I got my interviews arranged by time. So I got Robert Smith coming at 9, Rick coming at 10 o'clock, and so forth. And I can get the candidate details right there. Let me see if I can move this a little bit. Or I can get the details on the position and go back. So fairly simple component. Built using Flex. And what I want to do next is to show you the program, how you would incorporate this into your Visualforce page, as well as how you would build something like this. So let's start with how to put this on a Visualforce page. This is all the code you really need. So the key out here is, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can maybe see it better. I'm using a pre-built component called Apex Flash component, which comes as part of Visualforce. And I'm passing different attributes there, like the height and width of this component out there. But the key one out here is the source component. If you remember, when we compile a Flex application, it gives a binary called a Swift file, and we upload that Swift file as a static resource, and I reference the same static resource out here. That's like this one, and that's what the source component attribute refers to. The next thing is the flash vars. What flash vars allows you to do is to take parameters from the page and pass it to your component. So this can be any, you can use this to customize the component itself, or in this case, because the component is using the Web Services API, it needs to be authenticated. And because we're already logged in here, we're already authenticated, we are just taking the same session ID and passing it back to the component. So we are passing it from the page to the component through this flash vars. And we'll look at how it is consumed in the code. So that's all we have. And by the way, this is a normal page, and I can come here and add other things if I want. I can, for example, add a page block. And you'll see that the page changes. So this is just a normal Visualforce page. So there's, you can have any other content there. You can have you can mix and match these things. So one of the things is you can envision that you can build a console for a recruiter, and this could be part of the recruiter dashboard, so as to speak. So now I'm going to switch over to my Flex tool. This is Flex Builder 3 that I'm using out here. And there are two pieces to this. There is the UI piece that you use with Flex, all the different UI controls. And really the builder is I've really been very pleased with how the builder works, the richness of the tool here. And as you can see, you have access to a full palette of pre-built components. They have dozens and dozens of components you can drag and drop. So the UI component, now, as I said, you saw an accordion component. I got a canvas with labels, nothing very Nothing very fancy out here, fairly simple UI. So let's look at the other part, which is how do you bind the data from Salesforce to these components. So I'm going to switch over to the source view of a different file called Wizard, and make this a little bit bigger so that we can see the code. So I start off with a whole bunch of import statements. This gives me access to all the classes that I need in my code. And then the first thing I do is create a object called connection. As I mentioned before, this is your main handle to your web services operation. So I'll be calling all the methods on that. And then I log in. I log into my org. And these parameters, if I go back here, this is what we did with the flash wars. We are passing it from the flash wars, and we are consuming it out here. So I'm retrieving the session ID and the URL, and then I'm calling the login method. Now, with all the methods that you call, they're asynchronous in nature, meaning you make the call out, the framework will call you back with a result. So you need to have a pair of functions to handle the results. This is the way the Flex works, and it makes a call out, and the toolkit follows the same pattern. And right now what we are saying is, when the authentication succeeds, call back the login result handler. And here is the method out here. So when authentication succeeds, the framework calls this method, and we are doing a simple SOQL query out here. We are doing, selecting all the interviews. So this is what you would do in any Apex code or, in your other regular Apex programming. And then, we do the same thing. When the query succeeds, we go to the next part of it, where we are consuming, we are taking the results of the query, assigning it to our action script variables, so they can be displayed on the control. So that's really the pattern that we go through. We call a method on the web services method, the result comes back, and the result of the results is assigned to action script variable. So I'm going to make one simple change to this thing, just to make the concept a little bit clear. So if you look at right now, I'll go back to this view. Right now we are displaying a few of the details about the candidates, but let's say we want to display the address detail as well. So I want to have a field out here, I have a display out here that shows where the candidate lives. So from the source view, you already have the code here. Okay. So to start with, I have a string type variable to hold the address data, and again I'm doing a query to get the different attribute address, like the city and the state and everything else. And when the result comes back, I take the city and the state and assign it to the candidate address variable. So do a query, get the result back, assign it to the variable. Now once we get the data here, all we need to do next is to expose it, and I'm going to switch back to the design view to do so. And I'm going to drag and drop a few labels and call this address. And the label, which will actually display the value there. And here I'm going to bind it to that variable, candidate address. Okay, let's say make sure there's not this thing, and you can do other things with this. You can bold it and do other effects on it and so forth. But that's really it's got the UI binding now. I'm going to save it, and I come back to my org, and this time I'm going to update my static resource with the new this thing. So right now it's a debug build, so when you save something, it should update the Swift file. So this is my Swift file that I need. I'm going to hit the edit button and point it to go go to my debug setting. This is my Swift file, and save this. And when we go back to the interview component now, we should be able to see the new address data there. And there we go. We got the address data showing up with the thing. So this shows you how to do this one iteration of this thing. How do you take data from Salesforce, bind it to your UI component, and upload the file. So that was a very short demo, this thing on how to use Flex. Again, as Jesse pointed out, there's a page on this, as well as you can get the toolkit itself from our website.
I like this example, Nick, because I think it does a good job of showing how you can bring a lot of different data all together into one screen on Force.com, which I think is a really good use of Adobe Flex. Now, I'm wondering, maybe for the folks out in the audience, could you explain a little bit more about how this Flex component actually interacts with Salesforce?
Yeah, so the Flex component, it is using the Web Services API, and those of you might have used the Web Services API. We have two flavors of the API. We have something called the Partner API and the Enterprise WSDL. And this toolkit itself, under the cover, it's using the Partner WSDL. So what it means is, if you've used Partner WSDL in a different thing, it will find out the types in your organization, and then when it does a query, and these become dynamic properties in your objects on the Salesforce side. And one of the types, let me really quickly point that out, is this type that we are using called S-object. Let me go to this one. You'll notice that I've got a few things typed as S-object. So like everything candidate, so you're not working directly with candidates and positions in the Flex program, but you're treating them as a generic S-object type, and the fields of your record become properties of this S-object. And you can look at an example out here. As I'm iterating through this, looping through this array, each time I'm getting a new element from the array collection, I'm assigning it to, getting one of the dynamic properties from there. So that's how the toolkit takes your records from the database and materializes that as ActionScript objects.
So it seems like they're loosely typed instead of
It's loosely typed, yes, that's correct.
Great. Terrific.
Okay.
So Nick just did a really great job of showing you an example of using Adobe Flex and how you can use Adobe Flex to really bring a lot of different data together. In the example that Nick had there were three different objects where we were actually displaying all that information on one screen in a very clean and easy to understand way. And so I think that's a great example of Adobe Flex. One of the things that we were thinking about when we were trying to figure out other good use cases for improving the user experience of your application is kind of the traditional example, which is Google Maps. And Google Maps have been around for a while now, and they're great. I mean, I don't know how many of you have an iPhone, but that's one of my favorite apps right there. It's going out and using Google Maps. And we were wondering, how could we use this as part of our application? And I think we came up with kind of an interesting example here. And so let me show that to you. So if we drill into our candidate object here, I've actually embedded, I'm in offline mode. All right, that's going to make it a little bit more difficult. So let's see if we can go back online here. So we've embedded this Google map. I think we're going to get it this time. I think we've got it. Here we go. So here's our Google map. So we've got our candidate here, and this candidate, you can see where he lives, and so the recruiter could use this information in a variety of ways. So when they call up the candidate, maybe they could say, I see that you live right in downtown San Francisco here. This is terrific. Did you know that our headquarters is located right around the corner from you? And so, maybe the recruiter could use that to make the call like a little bit less cold, to make it a little bit more familiar. And another great way that this could be used is the recruiter could say, oh, I see where you're coming from. Here's a couple of recommendations when you're coming in for your interview. You could take the ferry, you could take BART, it stops right by our office, you could take Muni, and provide the candidate with just a little bit more information. So, I think this is a great way to enhance your application. And the beautiful part about this is that it's just dead simple to start using. It's really, really easy. And let me show you how you can actually start using this component in just a few minutes. So I've got my map here. It's embedded inside of my candidate page. So let's drill into setup and look at that candidate objects and its page layout. So here we are in the page layout. We can come in and edit it. And what you'll notice, oops, too far. So here's our page layout. And what you'll notice right down here in the bottom is this big blue area. And there is just a tiny little icon here, maybe we can zoom in, that says VF, which stands for Visualforce. So this means that we've got an embedded Visualforce page inside of our candidate object. And I want to show you how simple that page is. It's pretty amazing. So I'll go into my Visualforce pages, and I'm looking for a page called Google Maps Candidate. And this is a custom page that I built, and it was really, really easy to build. So here's the page, and you can see there's not a lot of content here. There's not a lot of code, and this is the great thing. So you don't really have to know how to write Visualforce code. You certainly don't have to know how to write Apex. You can pretty much go to the App Exchange and download this component into your org. You can look at the examples. You can copy the code that's in those examples, paste them into wherever you want to use this code, and then just make a few small revisions. So let me show you where to actually get that from. So here's the App Exchange listing for this Google Maps component. It's on the App Exchange. It's been built by Force.com, so this is one of our internal labs applications. So provide your credentials here. Click on the Get It Now button, provide your credentials, and it'll install this component right into your org. And then there are some great examples in there about using it. And so there's a couple ways to get to this application on the App Exchange, this component. You can go to the App Exchange and search for Google Maps. Or again, you can go to that URL that I showed you earlier, that Rich UI's link, or through Developer Force. So switching back to the component here, there's a couple interesting things that are going on in this component. So the first is you can see we're using a standard controller. So this basically means that you don't have to write any Apex to use this, which is great news. And there's also actually no Apex for me to show you, so that makes this demo a little bit easier. Another thing that's pretty interesting is this Google Maps International component. So this is what you're going to get from the App Exchange. And there's two parameters here that are really important. So one is that address parameter right here. And you can see that all we're doing is we're going up to this variable from the standard controller, and we're getting the street address and the city and all of the other things that you would expect that make up an address. And we're passing that to this component. And this component takes that information and is able to go out to the Google servers and figure out which maps to bring back, where to place that little pin, all of that information. It's all taken care of for you by this component. And then there's one last thing that you might have noticed here, and it's this thing called the Google Map API key. And so in order to use Google Maps, you actually have to tell Google who you are. And the way that you do that is you go to a web page, and it's right here. You go to a web page, and you provide them with the URL of where you're going to be using this component, and then they give you a key, and you paste that key into this component right here. So I don't know what this key means, but it's a unique identifier for you. And so it's pretty simple. And as soon as you've done that, your component is going to be up and running just like the one that I showed to you.
they may not have candidates, but maybe use it with accounts or contacts?
Yeah. So just to make this a little bit more clear, so I actually copied and pasted some code to make it work in the context of this candidate object. The examples that come with this are already pre-built for accounts and contacts. So if you wanted to add this component to accounts and contacts, the only thing you would have to do is update that Google API key. You can see that I've got my Google map embedded right in here. And so this is one of the examples that comes with it. There's also another example for contact. So you've got your map component working in here. It's standard. You can drag and drop this in here in just a few seconds and get it up and running. If you want to use it for your own component, then it just takes a little bit of tweaking, copying, and pasting. And if you want to take a look at this, all of the links are part of that session URL that I showed you before, bit.ly/RichUIs. So that's one way of visualizing data. So actually figuring out where a particular record inside of your system, where that corresponds to in the world, right? That's a visualization of data. Now, there's another project that we've partnered with Google on, and that's to bring over their Google visualizations components. And they've got a lot of them, and they're really cool. And so they've got stuff like gauges here, things that you have available to you as part of your Force.com reporting toolkit. But then they've got other stuff too, like heat maps, and they've got hierarchical charts. And my favorite here is stacks of cash. So if you've got really competitive sales guys, this might be a really nice thing to build for them, so they can all compare their stacks of cash to each other. And we've wrapped all of these Google components inside of Visualforce components. So they're pretty easy to consume for you using Visualforce. Now, one thing I want to point out, though, is that this is a little bit more complex than the last example. There's a little bit of code here. So let me show you a demo of one of these visualizations in action. I'm going to switch back to my recruiting app here. And so this application, I think goes a long ways to helping organize information, especially if you're a recruiter, right? So even for a small company, with just a few open positions, very quickly, the amount of data that you have to manage can become overwhelming, right? All those candidates coming in, all the interviews, the applications, this will help you organize it, but you still can be kind of overwhelming. And so Nick and I were thinking, how could we help visualize some of this data? How could we help that recruiter create their own mental model? And one of the things that we thought of is organizing positions at a location in a hierarchical manner. So this is a Google hierarchical component, and you can use this component for lots of stuff. It's really cool. So you can use it to actually show reporting hierarchies. So if you have contacts and you want to see like who a manager's reports to, who a manager's reports are, then you can visualize all the contacts for one of your customers. Or if you have an account, and that account has multiple sites, you could organize that hierarchically as well. In this example, we're organizing positions. And so we're showing all of the open positions for this particular location. And in this case, this is the headquarters location. And the data that's in here, you can see maps one-to-one to this positions information on the related list. So underneath engineering, we've got a marketing manager, and you can see that marketing manager position right here for the engineering department. So this might help a recruiter kind of get their head around what positions are open at which location. And so the paradigm for using this is kind of similar to what I showed you before. So let me go into the location custom object here and show you that page layout, because it's going to look pretty similar to, location and page layout. So this is going to look pretty similar to that candidate object that I showed you before, where up above we've got all of our data, and then again, we've got that little Visualforce page, this tiny, tiny icon, embedded into this page. And so let's go take a look at this Open Positions Visualforce page and show you what's going on there. So here we are, and I'm going to open it up in the text editor this time so we have some syntax highlighting. So here's the page, and it looks kind of similar. It's actually cutting off a lot of information, so let's go back out. Let's go down to Open Positions and just look at it normally. Okay, so here's the page. And there's a couple of interesting things going on here, because this page is deceptively simple, actually. So you can see that, again, we're using the standard controller. So, no code there. But there's also this extensions parameter that we're passing to the page. We're specifying that there's an Apex controller called the Open Positions controller, and that there's some custom code in there that we're going to have to use. So we've got a standard controller. That's the same as last time. We've got an extension. That's different this time. And then we've got a custom component, and that's the same as last time, and it's called hierarchical chart. But there is one thing that's a little bit different. So instead of just passing data from the standard controller, we're actually passing data from our extension. So we're calling this method here position hierarchy, and that's a method on the Open Positions controller. So this page is it's practically dead simple, right? But there's a lot of stuff actually going on inside of that Open Positions controller. So we can take a look at that by going into our Apex classes and opening up that class. And then I'll scroll down here and show you what this class actually looks like. So here's our controller, and we're declaring this location object, and we're getting the ID of the record that's being passed in here. And then here's that position hierarchy method, that get position hierarchy method that I showed you in the component. So what this is responsible for is passing data into the component. And before we drill into that and actually talk about what's going on in there, let me show you what the architecture looks like here. So the color coding on this screen is actually important. So all of the things in red here are actually provided to you for free from Salesforce. So this is all stuff that you can start using right away. You don't have to write any of that code. But then there's two things in blue here. There's the page, and there's the controller. And so I showed you the page already. That was a pretty simple thing. And so you need to provide that. You need to provide a Visualforce page. You need to put our component onto it. And then you need to wire it up to the controller. So there's two things, the Visualforce page and the controller. You've got to bring those, but we bring everything else, including the component and also some helper classes that I'm going to show you right now. So here we are again. Here's that get position hierarchy method. And the first thing that we do in this method is we declare what's called a Google Viz object. And so there it is. So that's one of the classes that we provide to you. And what you need to do with this object is you need to create the data structure that goes behind the visualization. And so this is documented on Google's website. But for the most part, you should be able to take the examples that we've built as part of this project on CodeShare, and you should be able to just copy and paste and put your changes in. So the next thing that we're doing after we declare that object is we're creating the columns for the data structure. And there's three here. There's the name column, the parent column, and then this optional tooltip column. And what those map to are the job description name and the department name. So if you remember back to the visualization, we had the department up top, engineering, and then below that we had a bunch of different open positions. One of them was the marketing manager. And so we're querying for all of that information. And for each one of those, and here's our SOCL query right here. And for each record in that query, we're going to create a row, a Google Viz row. And we just need to populate, in this case, the job description and the department name. And then the Google visualization component will actually figure out from that data structure how to display that hierarchical chart. And the very last thing, and where you're going to get a lot of code savings from Salesforce, is this toJSON string method. And so what's actually happening here is we're taking the data that you've created, those columns and those rows, and then we're going to go through that. We're going to iterate it, and we're going to create this pretty long string, and it's going to be in the right format that the Google Viz components need to consume. So there's a very specific component, there's a very specific structure that the data needs to be in, but we take care of producing all of that for you. And let me go back just one quick second and show you, again, where that component actually accepts it. So here's that Visualforce page, and that method that I just showed you, it's returning data to this JSON data parameter. And what JSON stands for is JavaScript object notation. It's just a standard way of formatting your JavaScript. And we need to provide that back to the component so that it knows how to iterate through everything and generate the visualization.
That was very cool, Jesse. Can you talk a little bit about if the data is actually sent over to Google for it to be rendered?
Yeah.
Or does it happen on the Salesforce site?
Yeah, so this is a pretty important point, actually, because some folks are pretty concerned about where their data is going and what systems they're connecting to, and rightfully so. And pretty much what this diagram is trying to show here is that all of the data stays inside of Force.com. So that's the most important thing to know here, is that your data never goes to Google. Actually what happens is all of your code, that controller and that Visualforce, they generate the data and they present it to your user's browser. And then the browser actually goes out to Google and says, hey, I need some JavaScript for this hierarchical chart because I want to render it, so can you give that to me? And so we go out, your browser will go out, your user's browser will go out, it'll request the JavaScript from Google. Google sends the JavaScript back to the user's browser, and that JavaScript will then iterate through that JSON data that your controller created and actually generate the visualization.
Okay, great. And where do they get the components from? You were using the hierarchical chart component?
Yeah.
Is it on the App Exchange as well, or is it in a different place?
Oops. So it's not in the App Exchange. It's on CodeShare. But let me show you where that session URL actually is. So we're on Developer Force right now, and you can get to this page from the main Developer Force page. And down at the bottom here, you'll see there's this additional resources link. And this link has all the information from this session. So we've got the recruiting app. That'll point you to the developer guide, the PDF, and also how to install it. We've got information on the Adobe Flex, as well as the Google Maps stuff, and then also how to install the Google Visualizations components, and then also the source code from today's session. So I hope that this session has been inspiring. I hope that we've given you a couple of interesting examples for how to improve your Force.com applications. And one of the things that I want to point out is that Google Maps component, that's a really easy component to use. You'd be surprised. If you went to the App Exchange, downloaded that, put that in your org, you could have Google Maps inside of your Force.com org in 10, 15 minutes tops. The other stuff takes a little bit more work, but it's also very doable. And you can learn more about it on our session website.
I just want to follow up on the point that Jesse just made. Even if you're a beginning programmer, don't be scared to just take the code, cut and paste, and just do a little bit of modification. You'll be really amazed. I mean, you don't have to understand everything that's going on to start with, but you can take the code, put it in there, and modify it there, and it'll be you can get these same things or a different component for your own applications. So we hope that you'll go back and try these things out and make your improve the visual listing of your applications.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you do run into problems, the developerforce.com discussion boards are a great place to go to ask questions.
Yeah.
So that is the end of our session. I know you've seen this slide before too, but hopefully you have picked up all of the documentation that we're providing at the conference. You've got your developer edition org or your free Force.com, free edition licenses. And most importantly, I'd really love to get your feedback on this session. If there's anything you thought that we could have done better, anything else that you would have liked to have seen. So please provide your feedback to us. We want to get better. And I think we've got time for question and answers. Looks like we've got 9 minutes. And at the bottom of the screen is that session webpage link again if you want to check it out. So are there any questions?
Yeah, can you please go up to the microphone so that we can get it recorded?
Thank you.
The Google Maps API key, you showed the page where it asks what website you put in.
Yep.
Is that just going to be instance.salesforce.com?
So you're going to need to play with it. So when you actually install the Google Maps component, and this is a great question, by the way. When you install that component, it's going to tell you the URL that you need to use. So pretty much you can not get the API key first, install the components, and then it'll tell you it'll tell you both the website to go to and also what URL to put in.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, once you get that key, can you use it anywhere in your instance of Salesforce?
You might need separate ones for Force.com and Salesforce.com domains. So that's one thing to be aware of. And one other thing to be aware of is that that's kind of a trial key. So if you have a really big org, you might run into limits there. So.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
If you wanted to do something with Google Maps where you were kind of using a list of different records to plot on a map, clearly you're going to have to do something a little more complicated and maybe have some kind of query involved. Can you kind of outline what would be involved there?
Yeah, so that's beyond this component. You're not going to be able to do it that way. And I don't actually have any experience doing that, but one of the other projects that's a part of this is also Google Earth. And I know that there are some examples in there of generating a list of locations. And so you might take a look at that and see if that would easily port over.
By the way, there's also Flex components available to do, to interact with Google Maps as well, and the charting and so forth. So you may want to look at both, see what is easier to use.
It's a really great point, Nick. It's something that we neglected to mention. So we picked the visualizations, Google visualizations. We picked those to show. You could also create many of those exact same visualizations inside of Flex. We just didn't have time to show both today. But it's a great point.
How do the visualizations intermix with render to PDF?
So the question, if I understand it, is how do Google visualizations interact with render to PDF?
Yeah.
So I don't believe they do. So I'm pretty confident that everything that you use to render to PDF needs to be part of the Force.com domain. And some of the things that are provided do come from Google. So there are some Flash components and things like that. I'm not sure if there's a better solution using a different using Google Charting, which is a totally different subject. That might be an option, and we could talk about it maybe a little later on if you'd like.
How you doing? We tried using Google Maps a while back, and a lot of our clients, being a B2B relationship, they're located within maybe the same building, within suites or whatnot. We really weren't getting back, really good results from a graphics perspective. Has anything changed at all recently?
So you're asking for the actual Google Maps technology. Has that changed so that it's geolocated a little bit more precisely?
Yeah.
I don't know the details. I feel like I read something about it recently where you can model buildings, but I don't know. I'm not sure. One thing I should have pointed out earlier to the previous Google Maps question is that there are also a number of mapping solutions available on the App Exchange that are much more sophisticated than this. This is a pretty simple example to just kind of show you what's possible, but there's lots of options here. This certainly isn't the only one.
What do you recommend for best practices when you debug in Flex for if you want to look at your Swift file rather than having it to upload to Salesforce?
So the question was, what is the best practice for managing the client components? Well, I mean, as you saw, the process itself, so there is the question around like having two different code bases or? Oh, okay. That's very easy to do. So what you can do is, I don't know if we can connect it back, but in the Flex, we were using the session ID there. But what you can do is you can directly log in as well. And in fact, in the code there, I was using it when I was building it, and then just hit the play button, and it will run it within the debugger. So then what happens is, instead of it getting a session ID and trying to authenticate itself, you're logging in directly there. And that makes it very extremely easy to debug and test those components. Okay. Well, I think we've exhausted the questions here. Thank you very much. And have a good weekend.
Thank you. After 12:30 out in the dev zone. So if you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you then.